Topic 4. Pricing with market power. Market power is quite common. Then, the problem faced by the managers of these firms is how to use their market power most effectively. So, it seems contradictory that a manager in a firm with market power has a harder job than one in a perfectly competitive firm. That's why, because a firm in a perfectly competitive market has no influence over market price, but the managers of a firm with monopoly power must also worry about the characteristics of demand. So when you have market power, you have the capacity to set a price higher than the marginal cost. So you can choose until a certain way the price, but in a competitive market the price is fixed, so you only can set your price at the competitive price. So in this topic, what we are going to see is some pricing strategies firms use to exploit and enhance their market power. So all the pricing strategies that we will examine will have one thing in common. They are meant to capture consumer surplus and transfer this consumer surplus to the producer. Okay, so the main goal of a producer with market power is to try to extract as much as possible consumer surplus from consumers. So let's see this graph. Okay, we have a firm with market power, then this firm has a downwardly slope demand, a downward slope marginal revenue. Okay, then a firm with market power just set a quantity, sell the quantity where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. That is, it would sell this output at this price, right? Okay, this is a firm with market power. Okay, so with this strategy, the firm would have positive profits, okay, usually, but notice that a firm knows that consumers in this area, let's see, consumers in area A would pay more than this price. Okay, why? Remember that each point at the demand fund and the demand curve, it tells us there's a reservation price. That is the price that every consumer is willing to pay for a good. So, for example, this consumer would pay this price, but if the firm sets the price P star, only pays this. So this would be the consumer surplus from this consumer. This would be the consumer surplus from this consumer, etc., etc. So all the consumers in this area, okay, all the consumers in this area have a positive consumer surplus. Okay, so the consumers in area A would be willing to pay a higher price, but they only pay P star, right? On the other hand, we have that consumers in area B are willing to pay a price below P star. So, for example, this consumer would be willing to pay this price, which is less than P star. So these consumers don't pay this price and then don't buy the good. Okay, so the consumers in this area, would be willing to pay a lower price. So how can the firm then capture the consumer surplus from customers in region A and some from consumers in region B? Okay. Then the way to do that is, instead of charging the same price to all consumers, to charge a different price for each consumer. Okay, so it would be, let me, one moment. So what the firm can do is to charge different prices for different consumers. So to charge this consumer this price, to this consumer this price, to this consumer this price, to this consumer this price. That is to charge each consumer the maximum price or the reservation price of each consumer. Okay, this is called, to charge different prices is called price discrimination. And we distinguish three types of price discrimination. First degree price discrimination, second degree price discrimination, and third degree price discrimination. Okay, let's see first the first degree price discrimination. Okay, first degree price discrimination consists in charging to each consumer her reservation price. Okay, so in this case, each consumer is charged exactly what he's willing to pay. So to charge this consumer this price, this consumer this price, this consumer this price, so it charges all consumers the reservation price. Which will be the last consumer the firm will sell its product? The last consumer will be this consumer, the one where the price is exactly equal to the marginal cost. So when the firm practices first degree price discrimination, the quantity that is sold is Q double star instead of Q star, which would be the quantity that the firm would sell charging a single price. That is the quantity where all consumers are charged the price where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Okay, so notice that by practicing first degree price discrimination, the quantity that the firm sells is the same as in perfect competition. Okay, then the solution in this case, the result is efficient. Okay, but notice here what happens. The consumer surplus is zero. Why? Because the firm is selling to each consumer their reservation price. So total surplus is equal to the producer surplus and the consumer surplus is zero. So this is an efficient solution, but it's not an equitative solution because all surplus goes to the producers. In practice, perfect first degree price discrimination is almost never possible. Why? Because first, it is usually impractical to charge each and every consumer a different price. And second, a firm usually does not know the reservation price of each consumer. So what firms usually do is to discriminate imperfectly by charging a few different prices based on estimates of customers' reservation prices. Here, in this graph, we have an example where the monopolist charges 6 different prices. Okay, P1, P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, and P6. The lowest of those prices, P6, is set at the point where marginal cost intersects marginal revenue. Okay, marginal cost. Sorry, at this P6. Sorry. Okay. So that's an alternative that the firms can do, since firms do not usually know consumer reservation prices. They can try to estimate the reservation prices for different groups of consumers. This type of price discrimination is less usual. It's more usual to observe in practice second and third degree price discrimination. Okay, let's see. A second degree price discrimination consists in charging different prices per unit for different quantities of the same good or service. That is, what we have is that in some markets, as each consumer buys many units of a good over any given period, his reservation price declines with the number of units purchased. For instance, for example, in electricity, the first 100 kilowatts of electricity may be worth a lot to a consumer because the consumer needs to operate a refrigerator or providing for minimal lighting, but the next ones may not be so worthy. So in a situation like that, a firm can discriminate according to the quantity consumed. This is called second price discrimination, and it works by charging different prices for different quantities of the same good or service. So quantity discounts are an example of second price discrimination. For instance, for example, when you buy larger packages of yogurts, you get a discount at the supermarket. Another example of second price discrimination is block pricing by, for instance, electric power companies, natural gas utilities, etc. And block pricing consists of offering different price quantity packages in the market. Let's see the following example. In this example, the company offers 3 different packages. One package will be targeted toward the high demand consumer. Okay, so let's see the 3 blocks. We have the first block, second block, and third block. The third block, the third package is target to the high demand consumer. The second package is target to the average consumer, and the first block is target to a consumer that has a low demand. So then what is happening here is that the price that is charged to the block with highest demand, the price charge is lower. The price charged to the average consumer has a higher price than the high demand, and the price is higher, but for the low demand consumer. Okay, so what happens here is that the monopolist in this case can construct price quantity packages that will induce the consumer to choose the package meant for them. That is, in economics language, the monopolist constructs price quantity packages that give the consumers an incentive to self-select. This usually happens in electric, natural gas, or municipal water companies where there are scale economies, which cause average and marginal cost to decline. Then the government agency that controls rates may encourage block pricing because it leads to expanding output and greater scale economies. This policy can increase consumer welfare while allowing for greater profits to the company. Okay, this is second price degree discrimination. The last type of price discrimination is the third degree price discrimination. This type of price discrimination consists of dividing consumers in two or more groups with separate demand curves and charging different prices to each group. For example, in movie theaters, the price tickets charged to the group of students usually is lower to other groups of population. Okay, why? Because these two groups of people, students and the general population, have different demands. So it makes sense to charge a different price to students and the general population. And third degree price discrimination is usually the most common form of price discrimination. Let's see how price discrimination can work. Okay, then the question is, how should the firm decide what price to charge to each group of consumers? Okay, the first rule would be that marginal revenues must be equal for each group. Why? Because otherwise the firm would not be maximizing profit, because if there are two groups of consumers and the marginal revenue for group 1, for example, exceeds the marginal revenue for the second group, then the firm could clearly do better by shifting output from the second group to the first. So the first rule is that the marginal revenue of the first group must be equal to the marginal revenue of the second group. And the second rule is that the marginal revenue for each group of consumers must be equal to the marginal cost of production. If this were not the case, the firm could increase its profit by raising or lowering total output. Then, marginal revenue for both groups must be equal to the marginal cost. Examples of third degree price discrimination, as I said before, movie theaters. Movie theaters charge different prices for students because students have a lower willingness to pay for a ticket, and then the cinemas could raise the profit by price discriminating. Another example would be seats on airplanes. Seats on airplanes are sold at many different prices. An example, most airlines charge a lower price for a round-trip ticket between two cities if the traveler stays over a Saturday night. So this may seem a bit strange, because why the airline should care whether a passenger stays over a Saturday night? The reason is that this rule provides a way to separate business travelers and personal travelers. A passenger on a business trip has a high willingness to pay and most likely does not want to stay over a Saturday night. Let's see then the problem mathematically. Okay, mathematically, the condition that it must hold must be that marginal revenue for the first group must be equal to the marginal revenue for the second group equal to the marginal cost. We can express the marginal revenue in terms of the elasticity of demand. Then, rearranging this condition and expressing it in terms of the elasticity, we can see that at the end, the difference in the price charged to one group and the other group depends on the relative demand elasticities. Then the higher price will be charged to the consumer in which the demand is more inelastic. Okay, so the relative prices between both groups are related to the elasticities of demand of each group. So, for example, it makes sense that the students have a more inelastic demand for cinema than a more elastic demand for cinema, then it makes sense that the students are charged a lower price. Okay, see the problem in a graph. Okay. Notice that we have two groups. Okay, we have, this would be the demand of the first group, and this is the demand of the second group. Okay, and these are the corresponding marginal revenue for the first group and the marginal revenue for the second group. Okay, notice that the demand in the first group, this demand is more inelastic than the demand for the second group, this demand. Okay, then the first thing that we have to do graphically is to obtain the total demand. Okay, the total demand is obtained by, let's see a moment, the total marginal revenue is obtained by adding graphically the marginal revenue for the first group and the marginal revenue for the second group. Then we obtain total marginal revenue, okay, which is this. Okay, then at the point where total marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, we obtain total output sold to both groups. Then, what is the quantity sold to the first group? So at this point of the marginal revenue, the output sold to the first group is this point, Q1, which is where total marginal revenue is at the point of marginal revenue of the first group. And the output sold to the second group is at the point at which total marginal revenue is equal to the marginal revenue of the second group. And finally, what is the price sold to each group? So the price sold, which is sold to the first group, is at the corresponding point of the demand function of the first group. And the price at which is sold the product to consumers of group 2 is the corresponding point of the demand for the second group. Okay. The next question is that when the firm has different groups, is it worth to the firm to sell to both groups? The answer is not always. It could happen that it's not worth to the firm to try to sell to all groups. Let's see this example. Here we have two groups of consumers. We have group 1. In group 1, notice that the demand is small, whereas the demand for group 2 is much larger. Okay, so the increased cost of producing and selling to group 1 may outweigh the increase in revenue. So in this example, what we have is that the firm is better off charging a single price per star at the quantity where marginal revenue of the second group is equal to marginal cost. Why? Because in this case, the additional cost of serving the smaller market would outweigh the additional revenue that might come from selling to it. Okay, so not always it is worth to the firm to sell all groups, to sell the product to all groups. Consider now the problem of the two-part tariff. Okay, consider the price problem facing the owners of an amusement park, for example, Terra Mítica, or Disneyland, for example. In this case, they can set one price for tickets to get into the park and another price for the rides. Okay, the tickets to get into the park is called would be the entry fee, and the tickets and the price and the tickets for the rides would be the entry fee. So now the question is, how should the firm set these two prices if this firm wants to maximize profits? Notice that the demand for access and the demand for rides are interrelated. The price that people are willing to pay to get into the park will depend on the price that they have to pay for the rides. So this kind of two-part pricing scheme is known as two-part tariff. And this two-part tariff has been applied in many settings. For example, tennis and golf clubs, because you pay an annual membership fee plus a fee for each use of a court or round of golf. Telephone service, where you pay a monthly hookup fee plus a fee for minutes of usage. Or, for example, in clubs. In clubs, you pay a price to have access to the club and another price for the beverages that you buy inside the club. Okay, there are many examples of that. So to see how this works, let's begin with a simple case in which there is only one consumer or one group of consumers with identical demand curves. Okay, suppose also that the firm knows this consumer's demand curve. Now remember that the firm wants to capture as much consumer surplus as possible. In this case, the firm has to set the entry fee, which we will call T, and the usage fee, which we will call P. Then, in this case, to capture all consumer surplus, the answer is very simple. The firm should set the usage fee equal to marginal cost, and then the entry fee should be equal to all consumer surplus. Okay, the entry fee would be this area. Okay, this area. When the fees are set in this way, the firm captures all the consumer surplus. So this would be the most simple case, but life is not so easy usually. Let's complicate a bit things. Suppose now that there are two different consumers with two different demands. So we have demand for the first consumer and demand for the second consumer, or two different demands for two different groups of consumers. But we have two different consumers, but the firm can set only one entry fee and one usage fee. Then the firm would no longer want to set the usage fee equal to the marginal cost. Why? Because if it did, it could make the entry fee no larger than the consumer surplus of the smaller demand, and this would not yield a maximum profit. Okay, so, I mean, the firm cannot say, okay, I set the price equal to marginal cost, the usage fee this, okay, and then the entry fee equal to the consumer surplus of the highest demand. Notice that in this case, if the entry fee is this area, the consumer with a smaller demand would not buy the good. So this would not be the optimal strategy. Instead, what the firm can do? The firm can do is to, let me see, okay. What the firm can do is to set a price, a usage fee, P star, greater than the marginal cost. And then to set the entry fee equal to the consumer surplus of the consumer with a smaller demand. The resulting profit would be 2 times the entry fee plus the difference between price and marginal cost for both types of consumers. Okay? Notice that this profit is greater, more than twice, than the area of the triangle A, B, C, which would be the profits of the firm if sets the usage fee equal to the marginal cost and the entry fee equal to the consumer surplus of the consumers with a smaller demand. Okay. What happens if there are many consumers? Instead of two consumers, what happens if we have many consumers with different demand functions? With many consumers, there is no simple formula to calculate the optimal two-part tariff. Okay, but there is always a trade-off. The trade-off is the following: a lower entry fee means more entrants, and thus more profit from sales of the item. On the other hand, as the entry fee becomes smaller and the number of entrants larger, the profit from the entry fee will fall. So the problem is then to pick an entry fee that results in the optimum number of entrants. Then in principle, we can do this by starting with a usage fee P, finding the optimum entry fee T, and then estimating the resulting profit. The usage fee in this case would be changed and the corresponding entry fee calculated along with the new profit level. By iterating this way, we can approach the optimal two-part tariff. But in general, to summarize, the rule to summarize will be the following. It's a very simple rule. The more similar the consumers are, the more the demand functions of the consumers are more alike, then the rule is to go to the first graph, to set a lower usage fee and a higher entry fee. The more different are the consumers, or the more different are the demand functions of the different consumers, the rule is to set a higher usage fee and a lower entry fee. Okay. Why? The intuition of why is the following. If consumer demands for your product are fairly similar, you would want to charge an usage fee that is close to marginal cost and make the entry fee large. This is the ideal situation from the firm's point of view because most of the consumer surplus could then be captured. On the other hand, if consumers have different demands for your product, you would want probably to set a usage fee above marginal cost and charge a lower entry fee. In that case, the two-part tariff is less effective to capture consumer surplus. Notice that, for example, at Disneyland or Terra Mítica or Portaventura, the strategy is to charge a high entry fee and charge nothing for the rides. This policy makes sense because consumers have reasonably similar demand for vacations, okay, to enter the amusement parks. And with this, we finish topic 4, and next session, topic 5. Finally, to remember that if you have any question or while you are studying these classes, you can always write me an email, and I'm creating chat sessions in Aula Virtual to interact with you. Okay, have a nice week.